I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled into my driveway and saw the empty stretch of water behind my house. My dock, my custom-built, cedar-top dock, was gone. Not damaged, not vandalized, just completely gone. I parked, heart thudding, and stormed around the back of the house. All that remained was a muddy shoreline and a few snapped pilings sticking out like broken teeth. I'd left for a 10-day fishing trip in Montana. I came back to find thousands of dollars worth of lakeside structure vanished. My name's Randall Foster. I'm a retired contractor, homeowner, and unfortunately, a dues-paying member of the Lake Briarwood Homeowners Association. And if you've ever dealt with a petty, power-drunk HOA, you already know where this is going. Her name, Beatrice Halloway. HOA president, clipboard enthusiast, and self-declared queen of the neighborhood. She's the type who wears a whistle like it's jewelry and believes property lines are more sacred than church pews. I didn't even have to knock on her door. She was already walking toward me, arms crossed, her signature "I know better" frown locked in. "Beatrice," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Mind explaining why my dock is missing?" She didn't flinch. "Randall, your dock was in violation of HOA guidelines. We sent you a notice." "I was out of state," I snapped, "and that dock's been there for 6 years. It was inspected and approved when I built it. We revised the guidelines in the last meeting. Your dock extended 18 inches past the allowed length. It had to go. You demolished private property while I was on vacation without a hearing or a warning. We acted in the community's best interest," she said, chin raised. "Your dock was obstructing boating traffic." I laughed. Actually laughed. "I'm at the end of the cove, B. There's no boating traffic unless squirrels are driving paddle boats now." She gave me the look she gives everyone she thinks she's above, which is everyone. "You'll be receiving a citation in the mail. I suggest you don't rebuild." I took a slow breath. I've dealt with all kinds of people in my life. Crooked subcontractors, shady inspectors. But I'd never seen someone so confident in their own stupidity. That night, I pulled up my old permits, photos of the original build, and the stamped approval from the city dating back 6 years. I also pulled the HOA's own bylaws from their website, saved them as PDFs, in case they tried scrubbing it later. Then I called my buddy, Marcus, who happened to be a lawyer, one with a particular talent for community law. "Randall," he said after I laid it out, "this is not just an overreach. It's a straight-up illegal demolition. You've got a case." I didn't want a drawn-out legal mess. What I wanted was my dock back and someone to pay for it. So I did what any reasonable, wronged man would do. I got 3 estimates from licensed builders, picked the most thorough one, and sent a certified letter to the HOA with the $7,000 bill. 2 days later, Beatrice froze. Beatrice wasn't on her porch the next morning. That alone told me she'd read the letter. I'd sent it with confirmation of receipt, complete with the contractor's itemized invoice and a polite, very legal request for reimbursement. No threats. Just business. By noon, I got a call from a blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. It was Beatrice, voice clipped and trying to sound composed. "Mr. Foster, we received your materials. The board will be reviewing them and responding accordingly." I knew what that meant. They were scrambling. Most HOA boards are made up of retirees who think reading a few Facebook posts makes them legal experts. They weren't ready for someone who kept every permit, every photo, and had a licensed contractor's breakdown of damages. I wasn't bluffing, and they knew it. That afternoon, I visited City Hall. The clerk in the zoning office, Carla, recognized me from when I first built the dock years ago. "They took it down?" she asked, flipping through records. "But this permit is still valid." There's nothing in the city code that would justify removal unless it was condemned, which it wasn't. I asked if she could write a formal statement confirming the dock was approved and compliant with city ordinances. She typed it up, signed it, and handed it over. While I was at it, I asked for a record of any permits the HOA might have filed to authorize demolition. She raised an eyebrow. "HOAs can't perform demolitions without filing demolition intents with the city," she said. And there's nothing here, no filings, no requests, no inspections. Nothing? That's when I stopped by the police station. I wasn't planning to escalate it that far until I realized the board had hired someone to destroy private property without a permit, without notice, and without my consent. That's not a fine. That's criminal mischief at best and destruction of private property at worst. The officer at the desk, Morales, took my statement while flipping through the photos and documents I brought. "Wait," he said, tapping one of the photos. "You got a picture of the dock before you left." "Time stamped on the security footage," I said. "And I've got the camera logs from the day they removed it. It didn't just vanish. They brought in a barge and a crew." He scribbled something down. "Can I get a copy of that footage?" I handed over a USB. "Already queued up. Shows the work crew arriving on a Tuesday morning. No city inspectors, no markings on the equipment, just a bunch of guys with power tools." Morales narrowed his eyes. "That's a licensed demolition, or it's supposed to be. If they didn't report this, we've got potential code violations. If they did this knowing it was private property, we're talking criminal charges." I left the station with a copy of the incident report and a promise that an investigator would follow up. The next day, Beatrice showed up at my door. She didn't knock, just stood there with a folder in one hand and a forced smile. "Randall," she said, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." I opened the door just enough to block her view of the interior. "About what?" "The fact that your board hired a crew to tear down something they didn't own, without permits, or the part where you're now under investigation." She hesitated. "There was a miscommunication. The board believed your dock was constructed after the new setback regulations were introduced. It wasn't. And those regs don't override existing builds. That's in your own charter." She glanced down at the folder. "We'd like to resolve this amicably. The board is prepared to offer partial compensation, full replacement value," I said, "plus the cost of the legal consultation, and you'll need to sign a written acknowledgement that the demolition violated both city code and HOA charter." Her jaw tensed. "That's excessive. You demolished private property. If I'd done the same thing to your fence, you'd have called the sheriff." She didn't respond to that, just shifted, clearly itching to get the last word but unable to justify anything. "I'll bring it to the board," she said, voice tight. Then she turned and walked back to her golf cart, spinning the wheel too hard and nearly hitting the curb. The neighborhood grapevine kicked into overdrive that weekend. I didn't say a word, but folks started stopping me during my morning walks. "You hear about the dock thing, Mr. Langford from 2 houses down asked. "My cousin said the HOA might have broken a few laws." "They did more than that," I said carefully. "They acted without authority. That's not governance, that's vandalism with a clipboard." By Monday, the city inspector showed up, not for me for them. The HOA's maintenance shed, where they kept their equipment and records, was under review. Apparently, the crew they hired wasn't licensed for demolition work, and the barge they used had no registration. Tuesday morning, a police cruiser parked outside the HOA clubhouse. Beatrice wasn't there. But Craig, the treasurer, was. He looked pale as he handed over a stack of invoices to the officer. Later that afternoon, I got a call from Officer Morales. "Mr. Foster, just a heads up. The city's filing charges against the contractor the HOA hired. Turns out he's not even bonded. We're also investigating whether there was falsification of records, since someone submitted a backdated work order claiming you gave permission." I nearly dropped the phone. "I never signed anything." "I know. We're bringing in a handwriting analyst. The signature doesn't match your license." That changed everything. It wasn't just negligent now, it was deliberate. Someone on the board forged my approval to cover their tracks. I called Marcus. He didn't hesitate. "We're filing suit," he said. "Property destruction, fraud, and possibly wire fraud if they sent that document electronically. This isn't just a civil case anymore, it's criminal. And your damages just went up." By Thursday, every mailbox in the neighborhood had a flyer from the HOA. "Temporary suspension of dock approvals until further review." It read, no apology, no explanation, just panic. That night someone knocked at my door. It wasn't Beatrice. It was two board members, Carla from the landscaping committee and Greg, the secretary. Both looked uneasy. "We want you to know," Carla said, "we didn't approve what happened. Beatrice made the call on her own. She told us she had your permission." "She lied," Greg added, "and she's been hiding invoices." We only found out how much the demolition cost after the police came. Their voices were low, like they were afraid someone might be listening. I invited them in and let them talk. Turns out Beatrice had been bypassing votes on several issues, fast-tracking decisions, signing documents without board review. The doc was just the latest and most obvious example. "We want her off the board," Carla said. "We're calling an emergency meeting next week. We need someone to present the facts." I leaned back in my chair. "You'll have them, every document, every timestamp, every law she violated." Greg looked relieved. "She's been intimidating people for years, but this crossed a line." I didn't say it out loud, but I knew the line had been crossed the moment she thought she could destroy someone's property and walk away clean. She picked the wrong lakefront contractor to mess with. The HOA clubhouse was packed on the night of the emergency meeting. Folding chairs lined the walls. Neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder in the back. Some clutched manila folders. Others just looked angry. The air was thick with quiet murmurs and rustling paper. For once, Beatrice wasn't at the head table. Greg stood at the podium, adjusting his glasses as he cleared his throat. "We're calling this meeting to address recent actions taken by the board president without board approval or homeowner consent." No applause, just silence. All eyes were on the empty seat where Beatrice usually presided like a monarch. She wasn't late. She wasn't coming. Carla motioned to me from the front row. I walked forward, carrying a binder under my arm and a stack of printed photos. As I approached the podium, I caught the eye of a few familiar faces, people who'd waved from across lawns but never spoken more than a few words to me. Tonight, they looked at me like I was the only one saying what they wished they could. I laid the binder down and said, "My name is Randall Foster. I live on Alder Cove. 2 weeks ago, while I was out of state, my dock was removed without my knowledge or permission. It was not condemned. It was not in violation of city code, and the HOA had no legal authority to remove it." I opened the binder and held up a photo of the dock from a week before the demolition. This image is time-stamped and verified by external security footage. The dock was stable, undamaged, and within the guidelines that were in place when I built it. I have the original permit, approved and stamped by the city, along with a letter from the zoning office confirming its compliance. Murmurs rippled through the room. I continued. Then, without filing any demolition permits, and without contacting me, the HOA hired a crew who tore it down using unlicensed equipment. They trespassed on my property, destroyed thousands of dollars in materials, and attempted to cover it up by forging a document that claimed I had given permission. People gasped. One man near the back stood up. "Forged a signature," he said. "Is that confirmed?" I nodded. "The police are investigating. The signature submitted with the demolition order doesn't match my license, and a handwriting analyst has already flagged it as fraudulent. The contractor they used is also under investigation for operating without proper bonding or insurance." Greg stepped forward and placed a folder on the table. We found a series of internal emails between Beatrice and the contractor, dated the day before the demolition. In them, she instructs the crew to proceed as discussed and says she'll handle the paperwork. There was no board vote. No one else saw those messages until they were subpoenaed. The room erupted. Not in chaos, just sharp, focused anger. People had questions. Why this dock? Why lie? But most telling were the looks exchanged between board members, ones who'd clearly been kept in the dark. An older woman in the second row stood up and pointed at the front table. "I want a vote to remove her. Tonight." Greg hesitated. "We're consulting legal counsel on the proper procedure. But given what's come to light, we will issue a formal suspension of her authority effective immediately." A full recall vote will follow. That wasn't enough for some, but for now it had to be. After the meeting, I stepped out into the parking lot. The night smelled like pine and damp earth. A few neighbors came up, shaking my hand, not out of gratitude, out of shared frustration. Beatrice hadn't just crossed a line with me, she'd been making decisions alone for years. I'd just been the first to catch her doing something she couldn't talk her way out of. 2 days later, a detective from the county sheriff's office, a woman named Harris, called me in for a follow-up interview. I brought every document I had, plus a copy of the emails the board had turned over. She met me in a small conference room at the station, her badge clipped to her belt, and a recorder already running. "We've got testimony from 2 board members saying they were unaware of the demolition," she said, flipping through my binder. "This," she tapped the forged signature, "is the issue we're focusing on. Forging a homeowner's approval is fraud. Using it to authorize demolition raises the stakes considerably." I leaned forward. "What happens if you can prove she did it? If she knowingly submitted a forged document to a contractor and authorized work on someone else's property, that's criminal fraud. If she used HOA funds to do it, that brings in misuse of fiduciary duty. We've already pulled financial records." She paused, then looked up. "There's something else." The contractor admitted under questioning that this isn't the first time she's bypassed permits. He says she's used his crew on at least 5 other properties in the last 18 months: fence removals, tree clearing, even a porch teardown. I sat back. "Are those homeowners filing charges?" "They are now. Most of them didn't realize it was improper at the time." She told them it was required under HOA rules. Turns out she wrote those rules herself and never filed them with the city. That night, I got a knock on my door again, but this time it was uniformed officers, not for me, for Beatrice. I watched from my window as they walked up to her house, spoke with her for less than a minute, then placed her in handcuffs. By morning, everyone knew. The local paper ran a short piece: "HOA president arrested in fraud probe." It was buried beneath a headline about a school levy, but in our neighborhood, it was the only news that mattered. The clubhouse didn't open that week. The HOA phone line redirected to a voicemail that simply said, "Your message has been received." Greg called me later that day. "We're appointing an interim president until the recall vote. Carla's stepping in for now. And we're auditing every decision Beatrice made in the last 2 years." He paused. "We owe you, Randall. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You lit a match under the whole rotten mess." I didn't need thanks. I just wanted accountability. And maybe, just maybe, a little peace and quiet on my own property. That weekend, the contractor I'd hired to rebuild the dock arrived with his crew. They worked fast, cutting new pilings, leveling the platform, sealing the cedar slats twice over. It would take a few more days to finish, but by Monday morning, I had a dock again. This time, I installed motion-activated floodlights and a pair of cameras that streamed directly to my phone. Not that I expected another demolition crew to show up in the night, but after everything, I wasn't taking chances. The dock wasn't just a structure anymore. It was a reminder to Beatrice, to the board, and to every clipboard-wielding tyrant out there that homeowners weren't helpless. We had rights, records, and, if it came to it, a damn good lawyer. And as for Beatrice, the last I heard, she'd posted bail and retained an attorney known for defending white-collar crime. Rumor had it she was blaming the contractor, the board, and even the bylaws themselves claiming none of them protected her from bad information. Didn't matter. The damage was done. Not just to my dock, but to the illusion of control she'd built around herself. And when the recall vote came the following month, it wasn't even close, 84-3. 1 abstention, she was out, permanently. And the new board, they started with something simple, a full repeal of every policy Beatrice had implemented without a vote. It didn't undo what she'd done. But it made sure it would never happen again. The morning after the recall vote, I stood at the edge of my freshly rebuilt dock, watching fog roll off the water in slow, curling wisps. A few ducks paddled lazily through the cove, undisturbed by the hammering that had echoed across the lake for the past few days. The cedar boards beneath my feet still smelled like resin and fresh stain. It was solid, level, and mine again. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. I hadn't planned to get involved in HOA politics. I'd moved here for the quiet, the lake, and the distance from the kind of nonsense I used to deal with on work sites. But when someone tears something off your property with a lie and a forged document, you either roll over or you make sure it never happens to anyone else. At around 11, I got a call from Detective Harris. We've completed the statement analysis, and the county prosecutor is moving forward. Grand jury's been impaneled, and subpoenas are being issued for financial records. We're including you as a material witness. I leaned against the railing. You found something new, we did. The contractor turned over an email Beatrice sent him 2 months ago. She asked him to bill the HOA for debris removal and submit it under landscape maintenance for the dock. I let out a low breath. So she tried to hide the expense. Not only that, Harris said, but the payment came from a discretionary fund that's only supposed to be used for minor repairs in common areas. That money's capped at $5,000 a year. She spent almost twice that on your dock alone. She cooked the books, I asked. Looks like it. She split the charges across 3 line items and backdated them. The treasurer didn't know until we showed him the invoices. He's cooperating now. I didn't have to ask what that meant. Beatrice had gone from arrogant to reckless. Misappropriating funds, forging consent, and lying to city officials, each one was bad enough. Combined, it was a blueprint for prosecution. You'll probably be asked to testify, Harris added. It won't be a long trial, but the DA wants to make sure the jury hears it from the homeowner directly. Whatever they need, I said. If it helps shut this down for good, I'm in. By the following week, the interim HOA board circulated a letter to all homeowners. For the first time since I'd moved in, the letter didn't list fines, threats, or passive-aggressive warnings about lawn height. It was a breakdown of the board's new transparency policies. They were implementing a vote tracking system, requiring written approvals for all major expenditures, and banning discretionary spending above $1,000 without member approval. They called it the Homeowner Oversight and Accountability Plan. I didn't care what they named it, just that it worked. Greg stopped by my house that Friday with a clipboard under his arm, but no attitude behind it. We're forming a compliance review committee, he said. Independent from the board, volunteers only. You interested? I raised an eyebrow. You want me enforcing the rules now, he shrugged. We'd rather have someone who knows how to read a blueprint than someone who thinks they're the sheriff just because they bought a measuring wheel off Amazon. I considered it. I didn't want a title, and I definitely didn't want to spend afternoons measuring porch railings, but oversight mattered, especially now. I'll review permits and construction issues, I said, but I'm not knocking on doors. Fair enough, he said. That's more than we hoped for. The next time I saw Beatrice wasn't in the neighborhood. It was inside courtroom 12 of the County Judicial Center. The rows of seats were filled with a mix of residents, reporters, and a few stone-faced people I recognized from the city's zoning department. Beatrice sat at the defendant's table beside a man in a charcoal suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The charges were read aloud by the judge: fraud in the second degree, falsification of public documents, criminal mischief, and misuse of fiduciary funds. 4 counts, all felonies. Her lawyer tried to argue that she'd believed she had authority, that there was no intent to deceive, and that the demolition was a misguided attempt at enforcement. But when the prosecutor laid out the forged consent form and the segmented payments disguised as landscaping costs, the courtroom shifted. Even her supporters, which by now were few, looked down at the floor. I was called to the stand the next day. I spoke plainly, no theatrics, just facts. I described the dock, the permits, the timeline, and the discovery of the demolition after I got home. Then I handed over a printed image from my security camera, the one showing the crew hauling off the cedar planks, while Beatrice stood on the shoreline watching with her arms folded. The jury deliberated less than 3 hours, guilty on all counts. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. She was fined $30,000, ordered to reimburse the HOA for misused funds, required to complete 200 hours of community service, and banned from holding any position on a homeowners board for 10 years. No jail time but a felony record and a reputation shattered beyond repair. I never saw her in the neighborhood again. Carla officially took over as HOA president. Her first act was to publish a detailed breakdown of every dollar spent by the HOA in the past year, along with scanned copies of the invoices. Transparency was the new theme, and no one seemed to miss the old regime. A few months later, I hosted a small barbecue on the dock with some of the neighbors who'd supported me through the whole mess. We grilled, had a few beers, and laughed about the absurdity of how far one woman had gone to feel in control. At some point during the evening, Greg looked out over the water and said, "You think she'll ever figure out what went wrong?" I shook my head. "People like that don't think they did anything wrong. They think they got caught." He nodded, then raised his glass. "To not getting caught then," he said, "because we're not doing anything wrong." As the sun dipped below the tree line, casting a golden glow across the lake, I realized something had shifted. Not just with the board or the policies, but with the people. We weren't just a cluster of houses anymore. We were a community, the kind that watched out for each other, the kind that didn't let clipboard tyrants tear down docks or anything else without a fight. I didn't win by yelling the loudest or threatening anyone. I won because I documented everything, involved the right people, and kept the spotlight exactly where it needed to be, on the facts. And that was what finally sank Beatrice's little ship of control. She didn't realize that in a neighborhood full of homeowners, she was the only one acting like she owned everything. Now, we own our neighborhood again, and every time I step out onto that dock, I'm reminded of it.